Faith Forged in Fire, where we dive headfirst into the unique challenges and triumphs that comes with being a firefighter, all while exploring what it means to live out a biblical worldview. Join us as we find hope, perseverance, and faith in the midst of the heat and chaos. Welcome to the podcast. Steve, you want to kick us off?
Welcome.
Went just as planned.
To
The Faith Forged in Fire podcast, brought to you by the Red Flannel Coffee Company.
Yeah.
Local here in Cedar Springs, MI.
Yeah.
We'd like to welcome Jake from Red Flannel, who is sitting with us today.
Thank you.
And Jake, we really love having you, and we're so thankful for you to come join us today and join us here in the room with us. We have our new fixture on the table. The squirrel is with us. We don't have a name yet.
Great gift that came from him last episode. Yeah.
Yes. And the very cool now Red Flannel coffee mugs, which are honestly, it's kind of like a paperweight. I can actually do and work out here with the thing as heavy as it is. So
you should be proud of me.
Yourself.
I haven't lost mine yet.
Hey, that's pretty good for a week.
So it was just on this podcast, Jake, that Steve was educated on where the name for Red Flannel Coffee came from. He was not aware of Red Flannel Town, USA.
You know, I am not from here, so I am not a local, but I was educated, and I had no idea. Who would have known?
There you go. Yeah. That name really came. We're pretty proud of our heritage in Cedar Springs. Early in the history of the town, it had only been a town for, maybe 20 years, and nearly the entire town burnt to the ground. And the insurance at the time only covered like maybe a third of the losses. And so for them to come back from that, was pretty cool. And then it was like 10 years later or so, 15 years later, the town flooded and destroyed a bunch more stuff, and they just kept coming back. And so they're that grit that they had and that hard work lifestyle, as we call it, at Red Flannel Coffee Company, really persevered and brought them through. And so that's kind of where we base our name from.
Do you work at the Historical Society? That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
That was really good.
I have friends at the Historical Society.
I was going to say, I just learned a lot.
He loves history, so just ask him about like Ulysses S. Grant.
I felt like I was on a tour.
That was your brother
just now.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, we rode horse together.
All right. You see that squirrel right there?
There you go.
There's a reason Jake gave us that squirrel.
He went there.
Good point.
There's a reason.
So anyways,
kept me off until now.
It's great to have Jake, who, as you know, their Red Flannel Coffee is a sponsor of ours. And so we're thrilled. If you want to know a little bit more about Red Flannel Coffee, where the proceeds go to, we talked about all of that in the last episode. If you haven't listened to that, I encourage you to do that. Today, we're going to kind of slow things down a little bit more. As you guys know, if you've listened to our podcast regularly, really our podcast is geared for really anybody, right? With the things we talk about and the name, all of it is geared around firefighting, first response, really, right? We'll even welcome the police officers that want to come in. We're happy to do that, but we do talk fire most of the time. Right. But really the overall idea is let's look at life through a biblical lens, because life is really hard no matter what you're doing, and especially in the first responder world. Life is hard because we see the worst of the worst. So let's look at it through a biblical lens and figure out how we can best walk through that. We've recently lost some more of our brothers to suicide, and we really want to help people walk through and understand how through God's grace and his help we can finish this race well. And Jake, you were a firefighter for, we learned on the last episode, 9 years. That's actually where you and I met.
Yeah.
You were kind of in the end, and I was just getting started.
Yeah. What year did you join?
It was 14 years ago that I joined, whatever year that was.
That's pretty tough.
Yeah.
24 minus 14.
You have a calculator?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Hey,
You have a calculator?
I do.
Oh, okay.
It would have been
Yeah.
about you. Like, I think you and I only ran a call or two together.
Yeah,
You were
yeah.
going off as I was coming on.
I think in your station, I think we're in a picture together, right? I mean, it was a pretty small.
I'd
Yeah.
have to look, but
Yeah.
yeah, it was a small overlap there. Yeah.
So anyways, so today we really want to do that. We want to talk through some things, and Jake's just going to share some things on how God has worked in his life over the years. And so we are going to kind of turn the podcast over to Jake in a lot of ways. We're going to listen, we're going to soak it in. I'm sure we'll have comments and questions along the way, but that's what we're here for, is to share those stories. And so
Sharing real life.
yeah,
what it is.
share real life.
We having conversations with people, we let them know, hey, we just hit the record button and we just talk real life here.
Mhm.
And
definitely.
and that's what you get when you listen to this podcast. We've mentioned it before.
Right.
Nothing is scripted. We just speak from the heart here and where God leads us.
That's why we have
Yeah.
chaos episodes like we had the last one.
which was great.
You know,
Sweet.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you let me back.
Right.
What's weird is I was just thinking that after the story that you're going to talk about tonight, we met in Grant. I forgot all about that. You and I met in the restaurant, and
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
You
Yep.
were like,
Oh, man. I know. I
technically
texted
one
you
of
the other
my
day 'cause I
first
was-
counselors, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
on what to expect to go through when I was going to do the EMDR therapy
yeah.
and stuff. And we had a long chat at that restaurant.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It brought all that back. I told you I was for some dumb reason going back and listening to that episode, and it just brought everything back. It was heavy, you know,
Right.
and you know, part of it is I'm an empath, so I feel other people's feelings pretty hard, and you know, feeling that feeling, and then, you know, kind of going back to that, yeah, meeting up in Grant and all of that, it just kind of, you know, just made it real again. And it was like, man, that's right, those memories that you push to the back of your mind, and then you watch something like that,
Right.
it's like, oh yeah, that's right, I had a very small part in that. And but yeah, that's right. So yeah, so I've been a Christian my whole life. I grew up in a Christian household for the most part. My mom, she kept my sister and I in church, which I am very grateful for, because it really laid that foundation for us, you know, as we grew up, and, you know, it kind of kept us grounded, because, you know, nothing surprises God, right? And his word is never changing. And it is really the only constant that you can expect in life, right?
Yeah.
That is the one thing that you can rely on and fall back on in life, is God's word, and you know, the life of Jesus, and so yeah, that was extremely beneficial. But yeah, growing up, and here's a kind of crazy story for you. And I say this is crazy because a lot of people don't like to kind of touch on, you know, look into the spiritual stuff and all of that. But when I was real little, I used to have nightmares of Satan taking me from my family. And my mom, I remember I was like 6 or 7 years old, and it was a kind of an off day and everything. And my mom told me, you know, Satan is trying to take you from us. Like, you know, and she didn't know about my dreams at that point. And it was just like, well, now this makes sense, you know? So I had this awareness of God and Satan and this spiritual warfare going on. And so, from a pretty early age, so moving forward, I jumped on your fire department when I was 16. I had talked to the fire chief. We'll get back to this. I'm purposely jumping forward here, but I was talking to the fire chief. I was 15. I was asking about, like, you know, if there's any kind of program that they do, you know, for kids to get involved in and everything. He's like, well, yeah, but you have to be 16 with a driver's license. That was essentially the main requirement there was being able to transport yourself to the fire station. And so I said, all right, well, he's like, you know, come back when you're closer to 16 and we'll talk and everything. It was kind of one of those conversations where he was just like, all right, kid, like, let's see if you're interested in this and, we'll talk later. And so I did. I came back and talked to him and everything. And then shortly after my 16th birthday, I get a phone call. And he had talked to my parents on the phone for a little bit and everything. And then my mom handed me the phone. It was a landline with a really long cord that I walked out the slider onto the deck on and, and talked to him on. And he's like, yeah, come down and fill out an application. We've got some gear sitting here for you and everything. And so I joined when I was 16. Now, if you go back a couple of years, when I was like 13 or so, 13, 14, I was battling depression really bad. I had seen a couple therapists and, our church pastor and all of that stuff. But it was really difficult at that age, because that's really kind of that coming of age, right? That period of just the very beginning of adulthood, if you will. And somewhere in that time, I had believed two different lies. And the first one was that my life is worthless, that my life needs to be validated. It needs to be essentially accounted for. And in that lie was this idea that my very existence was a burden on other people. And I believed this as a really young teen. I believed that my life held no value, and two, that, I was a burden on especially those that I loved. And so the second lie that I believed with that was that I had to do something about it. And to do something about it was either I need to justify my existence or no longer exist. And so I had remembered just, really battling with that thought. And, even in thinking, the unthinkable.
Can I interrupt you for a minute, Jake? Let me ask you this. So you say you believe this lie. Where were you getting this lie from?
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know where that lie came from. When
it wasn't people specifically. It was
no specific person,
right?
Telling me this. I mean, it could have been through various influences of either friends or people I shouldn't have been hanging out with, right. Music, TV, wherever, but it's such an impressionable age too, because you want to be an adult, but you're still so gullible to the world. You really you don't know anything.
Yeah.
You think you do because you're able to start articulating arguments, but truly, I know. Yeah. Am I right, guys? So somewhere along the way, I had believed those lies, and so even in thinking of like, okay, like I need to go, right? It was thinking to the extent of how do I do this in the least inconvenient way possible, right? To where it doesn't, inconvenience my family to find me this way. So luckily that obviously didn't happen because I'm still here with you right now. But the one thing that at that time that kept me from going that far, because it was a serious consideration, was my mom as a kid telling me, Satan's trying to take you. He wants you for him. And she's always told me, even now, since the day you were born, I was fighting for you. I've been fighting for you. I've been praying for you, and our church has been praying for you. And even as a kid, I remember my mom brought me to the church, and we were at this little white church, and the pastor prayed for me, and the whole congregation came up and prayed about these dreams that I was having and everything. And so it was very real to me, even as a child. So that awareness started early. And so it really benefited me as a young teen. So I went the route of, okay, I need to justify my existence then, right? Of why I'm here. And so that came by way of the fire department, right? Because now I can help other people,
right?
And offset, the burden of me being here. So, and you know, I chose, you know, the fire service not at random. You know, I've got two uncles who were full-time firefighter. One still is actually a full-time firefighter still. My dad was a paid on-call firefighter. My grandpa was a paid on-call firefighter. You know, big military history, or you know, big military family and everything. So, it was, you know, that influence was already there.
Mhm.
So it was just kind of a, you know, a means to an end essentially.
Right.
So, yeah, I joined the fire department, and at first, it was a little bit of a struggle to, you know, build those relationships with other people, especially being so young, and having, you know, being around all of these adults.
Right. And we know that firefighters are always the greatest influence, right?
They absolutely are. So,
Sure, you learned a lot.
So now that you've said that, right around that same time, there was a certain guy that I know who was becoming a lieutenant for that fire department. And the chief at the time said, "Hey, Rich, I got an assignment for you. Guess what? That kid is your problem now." And so, yeah, I kind of came out. So I've known Rich for a very, very long time, and
Used to help me feed the horses.
I that
So
long.
you put him to work, and
Oh, he did. Oh, yeah.
what was that?
We're just going to keep going. They can't hear that on the microphone, so we're going to pretend
Explosion.
that
This
big
is going to
boom
be
didn't
like
have-
the shelf falling off from the
Right.
wall.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
From the other
from the other
From the
studio.
other studio.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd actually learned a lot from Rich for, you know, what I, you know, learned for the fire service, and was, you know, answering to him for the most part. After
That explains a lot.
does.
Yep. No.
We understand now.
it's
Jake.
why they won't let me be a firefighter anymore.
I was gonna say.
So, no, I'm kidding.
Oh, in all seriousness, we've had that conversation when I was new. He very much just has that, like, I mean, there's a lot of patience I see, and it's just very easy to learn from Rich. And
Yeah,
appreciated
absolutely.
that.
I always
Yeah.
just drew the short straw.
It could be, but
No,
I've
like you
learned a
said,
lot as
there's-
well.
Yeah, there are things that he says and does that is either intentional or not, that, you
Yep.
know, that creates
Mhm.
opportunity. And so whether you know it or not, you're creating opportunity. Yeah. So years later, I was after joining the fire department. I took a short leave of absence. I was still battling depression even on the fire department. You know, depression, especially at that time, you know, it wasn't spoken of, especially in the fire service, right? You suppress that. You just,
Right.
you know, you don't talk about that. And, you know, I think you had said it maybe last episode that there's been a lot that has come out about, you know, mental health with the fire service, especially. So yeah, I mean, at that time, you know, and the thing with depression is that it comes in all forms, right? Like, you can look as happy as can be and be just dying on the inside. And, you know, you don't want to show that to people though. So
I think we talked two or three episodes ago now. We talked about finding our identity.
yeah,
Yes.
And I think
right.
that's important that you say that the fire department didn't help my depression, because it's not going to help your depression.
no,
And
absolutely
We
not.
can't find our identity in those things.
I would not recommend going the route that I went. The route of me becoming a firefighter is probably as different as you can get, for the reason that most people join the fire department. They want to help, not necessarily they, you know, are looking to justify their existence in the world and finding that identity. Yeah, at one point I had left the fire department on a leave of absence. I was still employed with them, but I had left for a few months. I was given a partial scholarship with for some writing essays, stuff that I did, which was actually on firefighting, oddly enough. So I went to school in Pennsylvania. I went to college in Pennsylvania, and that was kind of the very beginning of, you know, really tacking down like that identity, trying to figure out, you know, and this was a Christian college. And I had become friends with the director of security. His name's Ken Morris. He's a retired police officer out of Gloucester, New Jersey. really cool guy. I have all the respect in the world for this guy. And I would walk rounds with him. He would walk around the campus and everything, and I'd walk with him, and we became really good friends. And he was counseling me even if he, didn't know it. But one of the walks that we took, I remember him trying. It was kind of weird because it was kind of, we met up, and this was like a daily thing. We would find time to just kind of hang out and talk. And we
hold on, let's put a pin in that. All right, sorry about that little interruption. Rich is finding his seat. We're gonna pick up right where we left off in Pennsylvania, talking to Ken.
Here we are, in Pennsylvania, on a college campus, talking to the director of security, and he and I were on one of our daily walks, and it was a little bit quieter than usual. Like I was telling you, it was like he had a lot on his mind, and so kind of out of the blue, we're walking, and he turns to me and says, college isn't for everybody, and which I thought was a weird thing to say at that moment, but he says, some of us were set apart to help carry the burdens of others. And some of us, God has given a gift to be able to step into others' darkness and help guide them towards the light. And I think what he was, his intention in all of that, and his whole point to that was helping me, realize that, the thing you were doing was a good thing. It wasn't, just selfish for the reasoning that you got on and everything. Right. So eventually I would come back to the fire department, and I would be on for another couple of years at least. But obviously that hadn't really solved anything. And this is really, one long journey to, finding that identity and getting past this point of depression. And so it would lead me back to the fire department. I would become an EMT at the same time, did a bunch of ride-alongs and work with an ambulance company. And, so that was kind of maybe the very first, I always kind of attribute that to like that very beginning of the turning point. Mm-hmm. Because that leading me back to the fire department kind of led me to the idea that, maybe I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Maybe this isn't, what we meant, or what God intended us for as far as carrying, each other's burdens. So one of the calls that I had been on, trying to remember, it was October 28th, 2010. And so this particular call, it's still, even now, I can see it and smell it and hear it and feel it. And essentially, I'm not going to get into details about everything. There was a fatality. And when we had initially gotten called out, it was initially called out as a medical. So we went med 1, but unknown injuries, and we get there, and it kind of turned into like a search at that point, and then it was a recovery at very, very quick. It changed very quickly. So I remember having the med bag over my shoulder, and I had a backboard in my other hand, and I am just, booking it through this field, and then we got called as I'm walking back there that, this person has been found and everything. And what was really difficult was that the dad had found him, and he was just laying there weeping over his son. And I was immediately transported back at that moment to a conversation that I had with my dad. Mm-hmm. We were sitting on his bed and, talking about those thoughts of unaliving myself. Mm-hmm. And I remember him telling me, I can replace a lot of things, but I can't replace you. And that always stuck with me. Even now I remember it. But it was so weird because it wasn't even a day that I was particularly feeling low or anything, right. But it was just that, I know you hate the word trigger, and I do too, because it's so overused, but that was really that that moment that was like, bam, it triggered that.
But it was in a good way. It wasn't
in a good
necessarily
way,
like triggering the
Right.
Lord use. Isn't it amazing how God does that though?
Yeah.
It's not a good thing.
Yep.
But he used that to show you the reality of
Right. Yeah.
of man, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There is no convenient way out. There is no
Right.
way that you can do this without,
Right.
hurting
And it's
other
not
people.
just about you. Look at everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
So, so again, being an empath and really feeling people's feelings, I got down and just sat with a dad and held him and, wept with him. And it was incredibly tough. Especially with everything going on. And so I was really questioning like, okay, can I keep doing this?
Mm-hmm.
So then on August 11th of the next year, it was a Thursday. We had our training or a meeting or something. We were all standing out in front of the station prior to.
I remember that one like it was yesterday.
Yeah,
it was training.
That's the call. That's one of the few calls I remember you being on.
Yeah.
I can still remember that one like it was like right
Oh, yeah.
now.
Oh yeah. So this was really when everything came to a head for me. At this point I had been on for a little over 9 years, and we were standing out before training, chit-chatting. I'm sure it was appropriate conversation.
No, it was you and I.
It was probably appropriate because I was standing there, and Rich
That's
usually
very
was
true.
the guy that was like, "Hey, the chaplain's here. We
It
better
was-
dial it
That's
down."
very true.
It was appropriate. We were talking about handguns.
Oh, that's
You
right.
were- you were
oh, that's right.
You were showing me a new Glock, I believe that you had.
Incredible memories.
I know.
You guys
Well,
had. Like,
wow.
but
you're still
here's the
trapped,
thing,
though.
Steve. Here's the thing, and this is
Boom.
interesting because Steve is not in this world.
Yes.
So this is
This is new for me. I
Exactly.
mean, I've never
Right.
was on a truck, even though I was
It-
involved in
Right,
the
the
fire
only reason they remember that is because of everything else that
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah.
and it burns
sense.
it in your brain. Like as soon as he said that,
I knew.
I'm standing there. It's all coming back, and it's. I just had a conversation with somebody about this today. It's not that it bothers me,
Right.
but you carry it. You just can't. And there's
Yeah.
certain calls that just burn, and it burns every memory into your mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
One car pointed west, one car pointed south. The one that was pointed south was going north, hit the car that was pulling out this way.
Yeah.
We heard a boom, and
Yeah.
then tires squealing.
We all immediately, it was everything just stopped, and we all looked, and I mean, somebody had to have called it into to dispatch. I don't remember. I remember.
I think
jumping
Chief
on-
did, but I remember we
See,
got
that's
in
what I thought,
trouble
too, was
because we all ran
we
down there.
went without getting.
We didn't
gear.
grab one truck. It was at the corner.
Yeah.
Like we can
Yeah.
see the corner. We just
Right.
took off.
running. Yep.
And then
So-
we're like, we have nothing. We got to go back and get everything.
Yeah. I arrived on the driver's side with our rescue captain at the time, and he basically like grabbed me, and I'm an EMT at this point. I'm not this is moving forward. I'm not a cadet still. So I got up, and it was like you said, we were like foot racing to get down there, and I almost ran into him, and he turned me around. He's like, I got him, get her, because there was a passenger next to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember just seeing this kid in this car, and I mean that door, was inside of him. He was hit so hard and so abruptly. And so I went around the front side of the car and opened the passenger door, which would actually still open. Somebody had gotten into the back seat to hold C-spine. I don't remember who it was. But I remember talking to this girl and saying, "Hey, sweetheart, we got to get you out of here. We got to get you out of this car." And she was sitting there holding his hand, and she was like calling out to him and talking to him. And then she would go unconscious, and then she would like wake up and look around and like find him again.
Yep.
And so that absolutely, crushed me, and knowing that I had to pull her out, and knowing it, at this point I had been around long enough. I know this is the last time
Right.
she's going to see him. And
Right.
so, knowing that by pulling her out, I've got to end that. Like, I got to cut
Right.
that time out. And so, we got her backboarded, and, she was going out of consciousness, and, I was doing some sternum rubs, some painful stimuli to get her back and telling her, hey, talk to me, what is your name, and what's mom's name, and all that stuff. But it was like and maybe this is just my memory of it, but I remember it was so loud. Everything was so loud there. And I think part of it was that there were so many of us there because we were already there for this training or this meeting, whatever we were doing. So there were so many people. And because we were there already, then we heard PD arrive with their sirens. We heard, we had
Aeromed coming. We had everything.
Over us, and it was like a movie where there's this emergency and the music and the drama, it just like comes to a crescendo and then all of a sudden it's quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I remember it. And that's, I after that, I was dating my now wife. I remember talking to her and she knew there was like she knew this was tough. This was after the call, and so I went after that. I don't think I went home. I'm pretty sure I went, so this was a size 18 shoe, right? That
in the closet.
In the closet.
Yeah.
And at this point, I couldn't open those closet doors, right? And I had this size 18 that I needed to put somewhere, and I had nowhere to put it. And so
let's stop you there for a minute. If you're wondering what Jake is talking about, go back. It's on the YouTube channel.
Episode 2?
It's our second episode.
I believe so.
Yeah. Yeah. Rich's story. It's a great illustration.
So, so I went into town and to an old school building, which is an administrative building now. But if you drive around, I shouldn't tell you this, but if you drive around back, it takes you up the hill and you can actually get roof access. If you jump a fence, you can just take a couple steps up onto their roof. And I used to,
good information.
That is good information. I used to go there. That was like my, place to just sit and think, this is where I would go when I wanted to get away from everybody else, because unless you are looking at rooftops, you're not going to see me up there.
Right. And,
so I remember sitting there and just, thinking like, man, I don't know that I can do this anymore. This responsibility of, taking care of these people and, trying to be that, that person that's set apart to carry that burden and to help guide them out. I'm thinking, man, I don't know that I can do that. And so, shortly there, it was like 3 months later, I resigned. That's
the last call I ever remember seeing you on.
I think that was the last. There were plenty more calls after that. 2011 for our department was bad. We had a lot of fatalities that year, and I think
that was my first year, because that was right after the call that Rich talks about in that first episode.
Yeah,
was it not, Rich? That was the year as well. So it was piled. Yeah, it was just piling. That year, some tough calls.
Yeah, it was,
and I was brand new as the chaplain even at that time.
Yep.
Trying to soak this all in and figure out what's going on and try to figure out how I can help these guys when they don't really want some new guy speaking into their life.
Yeah, definitely. So I left the department after that, but the worst part of being an empath is being able to feel other people's feelings so deeply that you absorb them and they become your feelings. And, essentially what I had done over the course of those years of being a firefighter was absorb all of that and held on to it.
Right.
And without having anywhere to put it, I had nowhere to, turn to. My Christian walk at that point was almost non-existent. Right. I mean, there was very little substance there. And it continued that way for a little while. I ended up getting married the next year, and then in 2017, my daughter was born, perfectly healthy and beautiful. And then the following year we got pregnant again, and we were expecting a baby boy. And we learned, I forget exactly when, because this becomes a huge blur as well. But, probably about halfway through the pregnancy, we learned that he had trisomy 18, which is a genetic disorder. And so his vital organs weren't, developing properly. And if he were to be born, if we were to have, live birth, it would just be, a lifetime of having to, feed him and, care for him.
Mm-hmm.
And, they didn't know if he would be able to, even be able to eat, at that point, they weren't sure how, I guess the extent of how it was going to affect him.
Right.
So we learned about that. We went to a neonatal specialist, and he was, kind of telling us some of these results and everything. And they ended up doing an amniocentesis, which is where they draw some of the amniotic fluid from around the baby. And they told us that, there is a small chance for, preterm labor because of doing that. That's just one of the risks that doing an amniocentesis can cause. And so, I don't know what the actual, probability of that is, but, so they did some tests. They talked to us for a bit and everything, and they were highly encouraging DNC, and we really didn't want to go that route.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had other people telling us what they think and everything. And we're like, we just got to get out of here and let's go somewhere and, figure out what we have to prepare for and everything. And so my wife and I, we grabbed our daughter, we boarded our dogs at a local shelter, and we went way up north, and about 2.5, 3 hours north. And we went to this resort. We had dinner, got unpacked, and everything, and we ended up going to bed. And then the next morning, my wife tells me, "Hey, my water broke," and I'm like, and we're only 20-something weeks into this pregnancy, and so we're like, of course, being an EMT, you would have thought that I'd know what that meant, and I was just like, well, all right, now what? Like, what do we do? And she's like, well, I need to go to the hospital. I'm like, okay, yes, right. Let's do that. And so, we packed all of our stuff up, and this is, I'm trying to think of details, and it was such a blur. What I can tell you is that it did not take 2.5, 3 hours to get back. I had called my mom. I told her, hey,
So you drove back to a hospital
we drove back
here.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I do have a few relatives up north. One of like my mom's cousin or something who I love to death. Don't get me wrong, but my daughter doesn't know her or anything like that. And I'm like, let's just go. Let's get, and even then we both were like, we want to be home.
Well, and around here, we know around here, there's a certain hospital that is,
oh yeah, absolutely.
It's like the best for that stuff
absolutely.
anyway.
So we traveled back.
It overheated again. Hold on a minute, guys. Our camera keeps overheating, and then we'll
Did it really?
Yeah. Let's do this, guys. We're going to finish this because I don't want to interrupt what Jake's talking about. We're going to finish this with no video.
Sure.
We'll just,
Yeah.
I'll just fill that in. So unfortunately, you won't, if you're watching, you're just going to see the start screen is what I'll put in here. But we're not going to keep messing with the camera. We're just going to keep going.
No,
so,
that's all right.
So keep going, Jake.
Yeah, so we came back. We dropped my daughter off with my mother-in-law, who lived a lot closer to the hospital, and we went in, and they were like, "Yeah, you're going into labor and everything." So my son was born, and this is September 15th, and he lived for about an hour or so. We held him, and but at that point, he wasn't viable to for the hospital to really do much. And so, so we held him until he passed. And then, that was really the breaking point, I think, for both of us. And
so at this point, you're still spiritually, you're not in a good place.
No,
Your relationship with the Lord is not good.
Yeah, we're not going to church or anything. My relationship with the Lord at that point was just anger. Yeah. And so, especially with something like that, especially having come from, just having a child who was perfectly healthy and beautiful and,
right.
Just perfect in every way. And then to the very opposite of, just nothing.
And trying to walk away in a sense from there's absolutely no shame in quitting the fire department if that's what you need to do. But in some sense, there was some just you're still trying to figure this out and kind of running away in a sense.
Absolutely. So, One of the, really, I think that was really the main turning point. Like, that's really what broke us. And I remember my mom calling her pastor and saying, telling him what was going on and everything. And he's like, oh, I've got to go see them. And I had never met this guy in my life. And so he comes down to the hospital and just hangs out with us. He doesn't try to preach to us. He doesn't try to, get us to come to his church. It was just, he was going to be there with us. And I think now looking back, I think we needed that more than we thought. In that moment, we're still so, devastated and numb to everything going on that, it's hard to really feel anything. But looking back, I can certainly see the value in it. But really that was, it was after that. He even said it was really like late at night. He's like, hey, I have to go do something. But I'll come right back. And it's like, you don't have to come back, man. It's, really, it's getting really late and everything. But yeah, it was through that one interaction with him that led my wife and I, to go to his church. And it would be a little while before we went. So, after the dust had settled, if that analogy is correct, after things settled down a little bit and we got back home, it was really difficult. Having, it's difficult having grown up a Christian and then going through this with a very weak relationship with God, because you have one foot in the world and you have one foot in the Bible. And it's like, it just won't work that way. Right.
Yeah.
And so I did what any sane person would do. And I just started drinking, and so, but at the same time, because I did have that foundation of Christianity, I was like, I can't do this. This cannot be the way that I go. Like, something has to change. I still have to be a dad to my daughter, right? I can't go down this road, because then I would be abandoning her. And I would never do that. And so
That was God chasing his own, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I was like, all right, we're just going to face this. And so then my wife, she found a counselor. She went to one counselor like a couple times, and then, found a different, therapist to go to. And she was like, hey, will you take me here? Like, I just, I've never been here and everything. So she sort of conned me into going and taking her. And then she's like, oh yeah, by the way, as we're walking in, she's like, oh yeah, by the way, this is for both of us. And so we sat down.
She knew you wouldn't go.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There was no way I was going to go. So, so we went in, I sat down and we got talking, and, I was just kind of quiet for a little bit. Like, listen, this is for you. I'm not, you can trick me, but you can't trick me into talking. And,
Right.
But I think God had another plan. I did talk to this lady, and, it was fun. She just started writing and didn't stop writing. And then she'd ask another question, and she's flipping pages and she's writing. And I'm like, okay, this is looking good. And she's like, you have PTSD. And I'm like, no, I don't. You know what I mean? And in my mind, I'm like, PTSD, that is what our soldiers are coming home from.
Right.
Right. That's not from anything that I've been through. That, that's not real. So I was a little skeptical at first. And then what really in my mind, like, kind of validated her claim was, she was like, do you ever just hear sirens and then you look around and there's nothing going on around you? And I was like, yeah. She's like, yeah, that's trauma. She's like, wow. I specialize in PTSD for firefighters and EMS workers and police officers. And that is like the number one indicator, is they hear the thing that led to the trauma. And so, so he said, I was like, oh, all right, when do I come back? Yeah. So we did, we came back, and we went to see her for quite a while. And that was like how you were talking about when we met in Grant, the EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization. I can't even say it. Good enough. Reprogramming. Yeah. It's incredible though. And I went to see her for quite a while, and that really helped. But it was really when my wife and I decided that we needed to go, see my mom's pastor and go to that church. And we walked in, and I'll never forget, he was standing right in front of the foyer, and he was talking to some lady, and he looked up and then just kind of did a double take, and he just walked away mid conversation and comes over and gives us a big hug. And he's like, I am so happy that you're here.
Wow.
And that was really cool, because then, that really led to us, getting back into church and growing spiritually and kind of, relaying that foundation for us. And that kind of began the process of laying that foundation for my kids as well. So, God forbid they have to go through any of this stuff. But if they do, I want them to have that foundation that I had that, years later, prevented me from doing anything that I couldn't turn back from.
Right.
That
The grace of God continuing, right? We have that conversation.
Absolutely. So, that's it, man.
So I'll bring this up to you. We were in Grant, and you're explaining EMDR, which if you've never been through it, you don't know. How do you explain that? So one of the things that you were saying is every once in a while a therapist will stop and go like, Jake, where are you? What are you thinking?
Yeah.
One of the stories you told me was, is it normal to see squirrels? Because you'd said something about in one of the therapy things, your mind is going to places and you're instructed to just let your mind go wherever it's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yep.
And you kind of drifted off and saw squirrels. So that's why when you brought that out at the last podcast, I'm thinking to myself where we were and where we're at now.
Yeah, definitely.
Because back then you wouldn't have laughed about having a squirrel sitting on the desk of the podcast.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Well, it's amazing too when you say that, because literally just this week I sent Rich a text after a text he sent me and said, but by the grace of God, look what God has done for you, because except for the grace of God, your grandchildren would not, as he's enjoying his grandkids, your grandkids wouldn't even know you now.
Yeah, absolutely.
There was a couple of things you were saying there that it was trigger. I don't want to trigger, but it was triggering something in me.
It's so hard to find a different word.
No, I know. We got to think of they sending them there for that.
Yeah.
But no, I was thinking, you go to this counselor and go figure this counselor, it's providential. Like here, this counselor specializes in something for you specifically.
Right.
And then as you go to the church, the guy stops mid comes over. So it's interesting. And I was having this conversation with somebody today, is that, sometimes in our relationship with God, when things are going good, sometimes we can't see God because things are really good and we're not paying attention to God. Sometimes we get in these low points and we can see God at work. Like when you're sitting there with that counselor and going, you have PTSD. I specialize in this. Of all the people you could have seen, you happen to see someone there. That was God at work saying, I brought you here. You didn't want to go.
Right.
Your wife wanted to go. You didn't want to go.
Right.
And here it was meant for you. I mean, God was bringing you there specifically to say, Jake, I love you. I'm here and understand what's going on here. This isn't just some session. There's a bigger picture here for you specifically. And that's what you need. And you could see God work.
Absolutely.
You could see him clearly in a moment like that.
Yeah. And thinking back to when the director of security at the college there, the fact that he used that phrase, that we've been set apart, you go back to Leviticus 20:26, where God said that I have set you apart from the nations, you're mine. Now I know, he was kind of setting expectations, like divine expectations for the Israelites, but, even so through, Christ's death and sanctifying us and setting us apart, we belong to him. We can run from him and we can do anything we can humanly do to avoid that, but we belong to him and he chases after us. And that's evident in, these different, periods throughout my life that just brings me back. And so, yeah.
Well, I was thinking about that too, because I think everybody on this podcast, we would agree with this. The ultimate healer is God, right? The ultimate healer in those situations. I think back, because I was walking with Rich through most of that, and the ultimate healer was Christ. However, he uses those other things to help get in a place where then because sometimes we're so broken that it's hard to even know what to do with God or with his word. And once you can start to, your mind even can start to process the way that it's supposed to, then you can begin to now, like, okay, God, now I'm here, now I'm ready.
Right. Yeah. You gain that clarity, and looking back, trying to, what made the most sense at that time. All right, I'm going to do this task that's going to justify my existence by being the one to help, call people out of their darkness. And, I can't call people out of darkness. But like you said, that's God at work. You can facilitate it. And, you had said, I think in the last podcast, you were asking about the Beard and Flannel Society and how, all of that. And I'll be really quick with this, but, where I joke around about you founding that is because the way that it was born was you just essentially dared me, hey, this festival is coming up. It'd be hilarious if you put in a float in the parade
with and just bearded men.
Bearded men. And so I said, all right, man, I'll do it. And so I made the just dumbest looking float that you could possibly imagine. Because this was, it was like right before the parade. So I didn't have any time to actually, make a float. And I only had like 2 bearded friends at the time. So I didn't have a lot of people put on there. So what I did was I pulled people out of the crowd onto the float. And I was telling PJ this earlier, I was pulling all these men onto the float. And by the time we got done with the parade, they had loved it. They wanted to know, like, hey man, how do I join this society? How do I become part of this? Right. And I was like, you can't, because it doesn't exist. Right. This was just kind of a joke. But what I learned from it was that there's so many people, and I don't want to say especially men, but through, my perspective, especially men, they're longing to belong to something. They're longing for that fellowship. And so where, maybe I can't necessarily, draw people out of their darkness. I can, create this platform of fellowship and influence to where I can say, hey, I can be a, an influence on or I can be a representative of, Christian living and, how to be a dad and a community leader and all of that. And I will try not to take up too much more of your time. I apologize, but I do want to make this point. In John 11, where Jesus is going to raise Lazarus from the grave, something stands out, and it kind of lends some validity or credibility to, what I guess the point that I'm trying to make. In verse 43, it says, when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them being Mary and Martha and friends of Lazarus who were mourning his death, take off the grave clothes and let him go. And I think there's a lesson in that, in the sense of, when we find people that are broken and they're trying to, step out of that grave, we've got to be there to take those grave clothes off of them. They're gonna smell like death, and they're gonna, look like it and act like it still, because they're still broken, and they're, but we need to be there to receive them. And that's really, I think that's the purpose of being a Christian and to being a church, and the purpose of, something silly like the Beard and Flannel Society is just to be there to receive people and help them through it.
Well, you said it, Jake. We cannot draw people out of the darkness.
Right.
Jesus does that. He's the one that draws us to himself. He's the one that gives eternal life. He's the one that heals. However, we very much can point people towards that light. Absolutely. And we can be there in their brokenness to show them the love and the grace that Jesus has shown us. You wouldn't be here. Rich wouldn't be here. Steve wouldn't be here.
For sure.
I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for God's grace. So why can't we give that grace to other broken people?
Absolutely.
And really, I think that's what this podcast is about, right? We're trying to in our way, in the way that we can, reach beyond ourselves and into the fire service where there are so many people. When you were talking about the PTSD thing and you said, well, I haven't done anything that would give me PTSD. Right. I remember listening to a podcast not long ago. Well, it could have been a while ago now. It's a guy that had been in Iraq, he'd been in Afghanistan, and he was then came back and became a full-time firefighter in a larger city. And his theory was this, and I thought this was amazing because I could not say this because I'm not a soldier, right? I've never been there. He said that he would say that first responder trauma is worse. He said, yeah, maybe as a soldier, he's seen more in the way of battle, but soldiers go over there and they deal with it over there. They have it over there. Yes, they come back carrying that, but it was a set apart time.
Yeah.
And it was in a set apart place.
Right.
So now they're away from that and not at all downplaying because that's a real thing. And they're struggling. I understand that, but his point was, as first responders, we deal with it every day, and many of us deal with it in the towns that we live in every day, even to the point of, like we talked about, that accident you talked about. Rich drives past that corner every single day to go to work.
Right.
I drive through that corner twice a month at least, and almost every time, it doesn't sit with me. It doesn't impact me, but very often I drive through there and I think about that night.
Yeah.
Or I'll be driving down the road, not even realizing where I'm driving, and all of a sudden we'll go past a house and everything will come back.
Right.
And it's gone again by God's grace, right? It's not something that holds me down. The point being, you just can't get away from it. You have to deal with it. There's just no way around it than to deal with it.
Absolutely.
And so we believe, and I know people think we're crazy. I've seen some of the comments on Facebook and on YouTube, but the proof is in those of us sitting here that God is real.
Yes.
And God can heal. And we're not putting down therapy, those other things.
No. Right.
No, and no, we're not. And the thing is, we need to run to God first and surrender to the Lord, and He will provide the answers.
Mm-hmm.
Whether He directly gives us the peace or He sends us somewhere to the right person, He will do it. But I was just talking about this with someone today, is that it's so easy for us to try to get the answers. And the reality is we need to surrender the answers to God and say, Lord, you give me, you help me. I can't do it.
Right.
You do it. And the Lord he'll provide the direction.
Right.
And that's part of the surrendering to the Lord. And then we surrender to the Lord in all aspects. Just give it to Him and let Him do, because He so wants to. The thing is, we're His children. He wants, just like our children are hurting, we so desperately want to help our own kids. What do you think God wants to do with us? He wants to, but we have to. Just like if your kid has got an issue and doesn't want to talk to you and wants to hide it and just don't, nothing, Dad. That's exactly what we're doing to God if we're trying to handle it ourselves. Nothing, Dad. I got it. No, let Him help you. Give it to Him, but it just takes us to surrender.
Yep.
And the moment you do that, watch what happens.
Well, and I love in this story, as we've heard in your story, we've heard in Rich's stories, just heard that grace of God. We can be as broken as can be. We can push Him out. We cannot believe He exists, whatever, right? We've heard it all. And He just keeps saying, nope, I'm coming for you.
Yeah.
I'm not done with you.
Yep.
I've got a plan for you. We're going to get through this.
Yes.
And He just keeps walking to the point of what I love about each of these is like to talk to Jake now, you're not that person. To talk to Rich now, to talk to you now, you're not those people that we've heard about on this podcast. And it's because of the grace of God. And that's what we want you to hear. We know this has been a longer podcast than usual, and we're okay with that. Yeah. When we dig into some of these deep things, we want you to hear the story of God's grace. We want you to hear that we're broken and we understand that, but we can get through this with God's help. he's going to bring us through. So if you're listening, I hope this has been an encouragement to you in some way. If you're broken, if you're struggling, if you're at the places that Jake was talking about, that he was at, wondering even what you're doing here, what worth you bring to anybody, know this, number one, know that you are loved.
Yes.
You're loved by God, and you're loved by a lot of people.
Yes, absolutely.
And your not being here is going to bring far more heartache than you can ever imagine. But just know there's hope. And if we can just somehow be a little bit of that light for you, and we can somehow, we're not the answer. God is, but that's what we want to
But reach
accomplish.
out and understand that, God provides us for each other as well. And we walk this walk together.
Yep.
This is not, this world is not meant to be alone. You're meant to walk with brothers and sisters, whether it's family members, whether it's brothers or sisters in the church or wherever it is. But we walk together and do this journey together.
Right. We should know that well as firefighters, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's drilled into us, brotherhood.
Well, and you look at Galatians 6:2, and it says, carry each other's burdens. And in so doing, you're fulfilling the law of Christ.
We have a response. I teach our church this. If you don't let me carry your burdens, how can I obey God?
Yeah.
Because you said it, Jake. You said, I don't want to be a burden.
Right.
And we have that feeling. Well, I don't want to be the guy. I don't want to be a burden. I can't obey what God has commanded me to do if you don't share your burdens with me, because I can't carry them with you.
Mm.
That's what we're here for. If in some way we can be a little bit of a burden carrier, if in some way we can be, like you said, that whatever God puts into our life, maybe Faith Forged in Fire can be that, and we want to be that if we can.
And we want to let you know, God, we love you guys. We love you. We love you. Let us, let God use us and reach out. We want to show you the love of Jesus. And again, we tell these stories about who we are and where we come from for a reason. It's not fun for us to sit there and talk about our brokenness and our mistakes and errors and where we've been. But God uses that, and it glorifies Him, and it shows that, listen, we're all on the same page, or we're all on the same boat. But we know we're going to get through this together with the Lord's help. He's going to unite us together as believers, one body.
Well, isn't that what we want? Isn't that ultimately, and all the fun, and I'm looking at this squirrel makes me laugh every time, Jake. And all of the fun that we have with the coffee, with the silver squirrel, whatever, we want people to see Jesus.
Yes.
And even in those fun times, the only reason we can sit here and laugh with true joy is because of the grace and the hope that God has given us through Him.
Only because of Him.
Hey, we got to get this plane landed.
We got to get this plane landed.
Jake,
guys.
Jake, thanks for being here for another episode.
Yes,
it was
Jake.
awesome to have you too.
Yeah, thank you.
You probably won't be back for a third right away, but
maybe we need to give him this. Say, you build us a bigger table that you fit at, and you can come back.
Jake, can you do that for us?
No, I'm sure we can make something.
We'll figure something out.
We will figure something out.
Jake has already, before he even showed up, he's got this idea of a bigger table,
Jake,
that we can maybe all fit at.
True.
Let's do this.
And maybe even another red microphone to show up.
Remember, guys,
Four amigos.
if you want one of these cool coffee cups or a nice 1 pounder of bean or ground coffee,
Not 1 pound.
12 ouncer.
12
That's
ouncer.
okay.
12 ounces.
Yeah, the competition does 1 pound. Remember?
Yeah. So I should say this, since our sponsor is sitting here, and I haven't said this yet. Gotta make sure we get this in, or he'll fire us. If you go to redflannelcoffeecompany.com, which has been a tremendous sponsor, and I don't say that just because Jake's sitting here. He's been a great encouragement to us. Link in the description, and you use the code PJ20. He's given our listeners 20% off of your entire first purchase at checkout. So take advantage of that. Get a cool cup. Get some great coffee. And what better way to listen to Faith Forged in Fire?
Absolutely.
So, guys, thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next episode.
Next week.
Take care.